IVM.
At Simplified, we love discussing hypothetical scenarios for the future, like what the post COVID world would be like, or if machines could take over the world the way Skynet does in Terminator. Well, the latter can be avoided if we empower our youth and everyone else with the knowledge of AI and how it can be used to make our lives easier and better, just without any of that taking over the world stuff. Luckily, though, Intel's Digital Readiness Program empowers everyone with the skill sets, mindsets, and tool sets to use in an AI fueled world. The Intel AI for Youth program is an initiative that guides today's youth to an understanding of AI, how it's designed, and why it's important today. Intel's been working with the CBSE, the Ministry of Education, and the Government of India to empower today's youth to build social impact solutions while demystifying what AI is. So, how do you take advantage of this? Purchase an Intel Core powered PC and you get free access to 80 plus hours of immersive and hands-on training about AI. On completion of the program, along with a certificate, you get access to AI toolsets to try to put to use what you've learned. So don't wait. Log on to futurebanawonderful.intel.com. Future Banav Wonderful by bringing home an Intel powered PC.
Hello and welcome to Simplified, the show where we simplify things or not. And I suspect this is one episode where it's going to be the or not part, because we've got an expert on the show. But yeah, it'll follow as you listen and you'll come to know what the show is about. But we're meeting after a while. So what's new, guys? What's up?
Nothing, just moved the country, that's all.
That's
not significant at all.
Yeah,
So
not at all
welcome back,
significant.
Shrikesh.
I have to, yes. I must appreciate right off the bat is that I was very apprehensive about getting back onto Indian Wi-Fi, but I'm surprisingly pleasantly surprised at how good the internet connections are here in Bangalore.
Yeah.
Some local cable
A
stuff
lot has
is like,
changed since you left in
it's about like
12:33 or whenever it was that you left.
So, very, very much enjoying 300 Mbps internet.
Wonderful.
So for those of you just joining into Simplified after a long time,
Or for the first
Shrikesh
time.
was in KL for a couple of years now.
Yeah, it was 3 years, nearly 3
Yeah,
years.
he's gone from KL to another KL, which is Koramangala. Or something like that. Anyway,
So
and
he's back.
I actually spent the last week in a homestay.
I
Panchshir.
saw
how
those
was
lovely
that? Yeah.
pictures, Chuck.
Yeah, it was quite nice actually. Just wanted a break from working indoors all the time here in Goregaon. So I decided to go somewhere else to work indoors somewhere else.
But
So it's kind of interesting.
did you get to go? So there is this amazing place close to Panchkani where you went called Kas Pathar.
Kas Pathar, yeah.
So did you get to go there?
So I didn't go for tourism purpose. I went there to work, and then I came back immediately after. But I have been to the Valley of Flowers before.
It's remarkable.
2-3 years back. It's quite nice. Yeah.
But for all you nature buffs out there, definitely must visit if you're.
It's kind of nice to see that. Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, is the first time I've been out of the city in so long, and just seeing all those mountains and all that after so long. It's been so long since I've gone on a trek or just generally been outdoors. It was kind of refreshing just to be out there. So all good.
And a big welcome to our guest, Siddharth Rao, who is like, he doesn't admit it except under duress, who is my nephew, but he's national level kickboxing player. What do you call him? Fighter, kickboxing fighter.
Yeah, I think
Kickboxer.
Kickboxer. And he's in Bombay for he is a judge at some competition that's going to start soon. And so we and Simplified just seized the opportunity and decided we should get him to talk about beating up fellow human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so fascinating. Incidentally, I'm actually missing an MMA class right now to do this.
Yeah, you are learning MMA.
No, so I'm doing a workout session with I'm doing a workout series with a coach, and he keeps adding these bonus sessions every now and then.
Okay.
So I did a few basic MMA classes long back and absolutely loved it. But they happen to be on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. So I'm actually missing an MMA session to do a simplified episode on MMA. So I have the best possible excuse to give my coach.
Excellent. Yeah.
So yeah,
Fantastic.
just thought I'd get that
Yeah.
out of it. Fascinating, Sid. Yeah, I mean, my experience. So, I mean, before we get to Sid, what about you guys? Have you ever tried MMA in any shape or form before? I've tried it so I must have done like about 10, 15 classes and know the basic 1, 2, 3, 4 type things. And to me, genuinely, since I don't intend to be a fighter or anything like that, I just enjoy flailing around and just working up a nice sweat and pretending to kick some ex-clients and stuff like that. It's quite nice, very therapeutic, I must say. Except that one time that I jumped and kicked in a very awkward fashion, and then my physio told me, "Yeah, don't do anything for the next 2 weeks till your shoulder recovers." So that happened. But what about you guys? Have you ever tried MMA or anything?
When I was in engineering, I had enrolled for a karate class. So I got, I don't know, we started with a white belt, and then I think I went right up to the green belt or something like that. And then
wow, I didn't. This I didn't know.
Yeah. So I had a roommate who was like a karate champ, and he was like totally awesome, and he sort of forcibly enrolled me. And it's a lot of hard work, a lot of exercise, a lot of
You sound the regret in your voice.
I just thought like
screening.
class 1, and I have seen all these Bruce Lee movies, and also I wanted to like jump and kick like Bruce Lee. And
but you weren't prepared for the theory.
Yeah.
They gave you a book like Karate 101 and match the following.
So I lasted all of 3 months, and that was it.
Yeah, makes sense. Sriket?
And the serious answer immediately no before I get into. But the only point of any kind of organized physical activity I was in was quite physically aggressive. There was at least some elements of MMA in it, because I used to play basketball, but not like. So there were 2 tiers of basketball when I was in college, which was the A team and the B team. The A team, we used to play the good basketball. The B team used to play in the B team league, where basically there was a lot of MMA during basketball. So there was, I mean, in the first 2, so it was a 4-quarter game where first 2 quarters were us getting beaten up by the other team, and the next 2 quarters was our team famously had very few smokers, which was not common in the B team league. So we used to win the games in the 3rd and the 4th quarters when the smokers ran out of stamina. So that was what our MMA league was like in some way.
So your USP was like superior lung capacity.
Yeah, we will just you will beat us, but we will outlast you.
We will outlast you.
Yeah,
amazing. So Sid, you have a sense of who the audience is over here. So if you're wondering whether to dumb down or intellectualize whatever you have in mind, you clearly know which direction to go now. So yes, how about you? How did you get started?
Naren start at the very beginning.
Naren says you're a national level champion.
When did this journey begin?
I was a kid when I started my first karate class. I was 4 years old, and I did it for about 10 years until I got my black belt. And around the same time, that's when 10th standard board exams came up, and all of martial arts was forgotten. And I wanted to get back after all the 10th board, 12th board. And that's when I watched this movie called Never Back Down, where there are these really handsome, ripped guys beating up other guys and girls liking them. So I was like, this is life. This is the way to go. There's no other way. And I said, I want to enroll for MMA classes. Now, the gym my parents used to go to, there was this one coach there who was taking classes. And I got in touch with him just a few months before my 18th birthday and did a few classes. And it was very, very nice. As Chuck mentioned, it was very therapeutic, where you go through a very rigorous routine, learn new techniques every day. It was very refreshing.
Which city was this in,
And-
Sid?
Sorry?
Which city was this in?
This was back in Mysore.
Okay.
Back in Mysore, yeah. And then time came where I had to move to another city for college. And for the first year of college, all my MMA was against my hostel roommates. There was no training. It was just, grappling and hitting each other. And when I came back home for holidays, that's when I said, I want to restart this thing. And I restarted, learned a lot more techniques. And that's when I started getting into the momentum of MMA. And I realized that MMA is basically two different things. One is the striking part where you punch, kick, inflict a lot of damage on the person. And then there's the grappling portion. So how do you take someone to the ground? How do you hold them against a cage? So MMA generally is fought in a cage, at least the most famous kind, is fought inside a cage. How do you hold someone against a cage, take them to the ground, and then blow strikes on them? That's the whole concept of MMA. And
but just on an aside, complete shitty aside, there is no more appropriate city to start your MMA journey than Mysore, right? Mysore arm or Mysore body.
Nice.
Yeah.
I was waiting. I was wondering which one of Naren or I would do that. Didn't expect that you would throw that punch. I mean, so that please ignore when we do this.
Yes,
And just
we have to do these asides. This is part of.
It's actually if you take it to heart, it's very demoralizing because here you are fighting with all your wisdom gleaned over years of experience, and all that your co-host got out of it is Mysore.
Hey man,
Yeah.
I had to get that somewhere. But please continue. You were talking about how after your training, how did you resume?
Yeah. So then after the holidays, I asked my coach, can you please connect me to someone in Bangalore? Because I really want to pursue this. It's a really nice hobby to have. I hated going to the gym because every day was the same. And I didn't like any other form of exercise than this. And I really needed to exercise because I just discovered beer at that time.
Oh, wow.
And
welcome to Bangalore.
Yes, welcome to Bangalore. So and this was my form of exercise. And after college, I go training at this place called Red Cage in Bangalore, a really nice gym. And that's when I started taking classes too. I got to a certain level. I started teaching, and then I started learning a lot more while teaching the sport. And that's when I got the opportunity. My coach calls me up from Mysore and says, there's a national championship in Bihar. Why don't you come? It's like, okay, national championship, good. Bihar, not so much. Yeah.
Not the immediate location that came to mind.
Correct.
But stranger things have happened, I suppose. But yeah.
Yeah. But then I agreed to avoid a family function that was going on. And
you do realize your uncles
this half
over
was
here,
not
right?
told unto me.
Yeah, like
it was the
okay.
Was it the 100th episode of Simplified Recording? Like, was that the family function that you were skipping?
Oh my God! Many a great accomplishment and achievement has been done by skipping family function. So please, you are in good company.
Absolutely.
Period.
Absolutely.
So you went to Bihar.
I went to Bihar. I was so nervous, my first tournament, and I got this guy from Maharashtra, and he was way shorter than me. I'm a skinny, tall guy, and they're just short and stocky. So I had a very good reach advantage, and I performed really well. But I got my ass handed to me in the second match. But my performance really impressed my coach, and he's like, you can do this. And I started practicing, and I went through a lot of training partners. So what happens in Bangalore MMA is it's either students or working professionals coming and training with you. And it's a floating crowd. No one comes to Bangalore and says, I want to be an MMA fighter or I want to be an athlete.
Do they float like a butterfly and sting like a... Sorry, no.
Oh, I wish they did. I wish they did.
That was...
No, and also the other thing that just struck me was when your competition in Bihar also, if it was in Patna, then that's perfectly the sound what happens after a slam and then the noise that you make. Pat and
It was in Patna. It was in Patna.
Fantastic. Even better. Please continue. Yeah, so nobody comes to Bangalore to become an MMA fighter.
Nobody ever does that. So that's when I ran out of a training partner one day or nowhere, and I told my coach that I can't keep punching a bag coming from Baswantpuri to Electronic City, which is about 20
wow.
kilometers.
Yeah.
So he said, okay, why don't you go to like a specialist in grappling, and why don't you improve your grappling, because you're striking, you've done your kickboxing at a national level. Why don't you improve on your grappling? At first, I was reluctant. He's throwing me into something I really suck at. And I went to this place called the Institute of Jiu-Jitsu. And that's where I met Rohit Vasudevan. So Rohit Vasudevan is a very, very interesting guy. He was pursuing his PhD in aerodynamics when he discovered Jiu-Jitsu, and he dropped his PhD and he opened his own school in Bangalore. And he was pursuing it in, I think, London.
Wow.
Yeah. So he came back and he opened this jiu-jitsu school. And the way he taught, because he's coming from a background of academia, and he had such a great way of teaching. I instantly fell in love with the sport. And he just knew how to cater to the learning curve of all students. And he taught you techniques. And jiu-jitsu, for all the listeners out there, is the grappling part of MMA.
Yeah.
So what happens is
Jiu-Jitsu is not standalone. So it's a part of MMA.
No, it is standalone actually.
It is standalone. It is standalone. So Jiu-Jitsu today caters to the grappling part. So MMA is just, so what MMA basically means is you fight, no pulling hair, no nut shots, and no eye gouges. That's about it. You can do whatever you want.
You can even bite.
No biting.
No biting. Yeah, no biting. And there are a few rules where if someone's on the ground, you can't kick them in the face. There's some small rules there just to keep the athletes a little safe.
That's very Gandhian of them.
Baki sab chalega, don't kick him in the face only when he's on the ground. Otherwise, that is also okay. Very nice.
Yeah.
No, but so that's where it's what you're saying is really interesting, because I mean the recent part that I saw, and as you mentioned, like you were initially you were a striking fighter initially, and then you kind of got grappling into your system. I was also I saw some videos about Lavlina Borgohain, who won the boxing bronze in the Olympics recently concluded, and she was talking about her journey, and her biggest struggle was that she was a kickboxer and she transitioned from kickboxing to regular boxing, and how she can and grappling was the most difficult thing that she had to learn about, how to kind of pace herself and how to not go all out attack and stuff like that. So there is a huge technical difference between those different disciplines.
Absolutely, because there are three things when you look at even a striking sport. There is levels. So you see people bending in boxing where they go squat in their knees. This is changing levels. One is changing the distance between the fighters. Now, when you're doing a kickboxing, because the length of your leg is a lot longer than the length of your arms, the fighting distance is different. And the third thing that comes into play are the angles in which you hit. You stand square with someone, you're at a 50-50 advantage. But if you get a neat angle on your opponent, you might have a great advantage. So these are the three main things that govern a fight. It's levels, it's angles, and it's distance. And even in grappling, even in striking, in any of the sports, these three are critical. Yeah. So even if you see,
no, please finish.
Yeah. So even if you see wrestling, you see Yogeshwar Dutt, you see Bajrang Punia, you see the way they stand and the way a jiu-jitsu fighter stands when they're doing a grappling match is very different. A jiu-jitsu fighter is going to stand upright, but a wrestling is going to be real low. And so from first principles, it's these three variables that govern the fight or the way the fight is going.
Right. And so that's where also it's what I've also seen about the sport right now, and the way the sport is being learned and been practiced currently, it's extremely scientific in the I mean, even the athletes are aware of exactly where their center of gravity is, how do they kind of get to that, what are those motions. I mean, they're guided by biomechanic coaches in some way on the very elite levels, I'm assuming. So can you talk a bit about like the kind of basic physics and biomechanics that any kind of fighter who gets to a certain level needs to be aware of?
Very interesting.
Yeah, that's a damn good question.
Yeah. So
biomechanics.
So there is a whole kinetic chain that is there when you punch. So if you're just throwing your shoulders forward, there's no explosive power. Your center of gravity, there has to be something rotating around the center of gravity.
Right.
And for that, your hips have to rotate. So when your hip is rotating, you can't keep your knee in the same position because you're going to tear one of your ligaments.
Right.
Which is why your ankle has to turn, and for your ankle to turn, your toe has to turn.
Right.
For that, you always have to be on the ball of your feet. If you're on your heels, you're going to enjoy yourself when you're throwing a punch. And even when you're throwing a punch, if you look at it from basic physics or basic science, the the fastest way to reach someone's face is through maybe a straight punch.
Yeah.
If they're at a certain distance. And another mistake that fighters do is they go for long hooks. If you look at a street fighter today, you'll see them swinging all across like a Lasit Malinga bull.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. But you see an elite boxer like Floyd Mayweather, their hook is really short. It's just small. Because the distance doesn't affect the impact, because distance comes in only as a factor of work being done. Not the force that is being inflicted upon the opponent.
Yeah.
The way you said that was geeky
force into distance. Yeah. No, it's force into work is force into distance. So if you increase the distance for the same work, a smaller force is what is going to travel. And if you want to keep the force the same, I mean the work the same, and the distance really short, then your force is very high. Something like that. Yeah.
Random aside at this point, the way our prof used to make us learn these two formulas was that force is the mother, is the all mother. So force equal to ma, and anyone who does work is mad. So force into displacement, mass into, so work equal to m into a into d. So that's how we learned these equations.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a formula for time as well, and our producer is telling us that we have reached that time where it is time to take a break. So we should do that right about now, just like I assume happens in a good MMA fight. So we will. With all those unnecessary segues out of the way, we will just take a break and we will come right back.
Yeah.
$100. That's all it takes to begin your journey with Bitcoin and Ethereum. No, really. With CoinSwitch, you can start investing in over 100 cryptocurrencies with just 100 rupees. On top of that, there are zero charges for deposits and withdrawals, so you can trade, buy, sell, however and whenever you want. All of this, plus their extremely intuitive interface, makes CoinSwitch the perfect app for beginners in the crypto space. But don't take my word for it. Just download CoinSwitch for free and try it out for yourself. If you'd like more information on cryptocurrencies, tune into a show about crypto with me, Rohan Joshi, my new adventure on IVM Podcasts. CoinSwitch, kuch to badlega.
And we are back. We are talking with Siddharth Rao, who is Naren's nephew. How he ended up in that position is a story for another day. And how Naren keeps managing to nepotize Simplified. Naren, don't think that we have forgotten your previous attempts at.
Naren is a veritable Karan Johar of the Simplified podcast.
Oh, goodness gracious. Anyway, before the break, we were talking about MMA, and we shall continue talking about MMA. We were talking about the physics of the whole thing. So, Sid, anything you want to add to that? To what you said?
Not on the exact MMA portion, but I do have a continuation of the physics how. So, when we look at a fighting art, this is me trying to segue into the jiu-jitsu portion of MMA. So when we look at any fighting art, now your capacity to land maximum impact on me is only if you're standing up. That's because your center of gravity is farthest from the ground at any possible time.
Right.
But the moment I put your center of gravity really close to the ground, your capacity to hit me or inflict damage upon me is going to be extremely lower. It's going to become a lot lower, which is why wrestling and jiu-jitsu come into play here in the MMA sport. So if you see the most successful fighter in mixed martial arts history is this guy called Khabib Nurmagomedov. And he was known for two things: not getting hit and taking everybody to the ground, making them feel helpless and punching their face out. That was the main thing. And you look at the patterns of any successful, any fighter in MMA who has a legacy, they were always great grapplers or great wrestlers.
Yeah.
That was only because of their ability to put the center of gravity of the person to the ground.
That's something interesting just on that point, what you were mentioning, because I mean, a lot of people got turned into MMA because it seemed like this really exciting form of like
spectacular. You're jumping all over the cage.
Fast fights. But you're right, because the best of the fighters, a lot of their fight would be on the ground. It would also, I mean, even though the fights were really, I mean, Ronda Rousey comes to mind when one of the fighters, her signature move was the grapple, then submission, the armbar that she had. And so, I mean, when you see these different, when you see that move, it actually, I mean, yes, it is spectacular in the way that how she can kind of like overcome an opponent really quickly when she did it. But it was also like, I mean, if she was like really working an opponent and kind of like building up to it, it is actually just like looks like it's a pile of limbs.
Yeah.
And it's just a lot of struggling on the ground, which doesn't look as spectacular and impressive. So you're very right in saying that how that part is actually one of the most important parts in elite MMA, although it doesn't look as spectacular as like a flying kick or a punch of some sort.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at the most exciting fights, the ones with most pay-per-view watches are always the ones that were brutal, bloody, and that never went to the ground. And fighters like Anderson Silva, there was a fighter called Anderson Silva, there's a Brazilian called Jose Aldo Jr. These two kept it really interesting and they were high-level strikers. But the reason their fights were exciting is they never let any of their opponents take them to the ground.
Right.
So they were really good at takedown defense.
There's a management lesson here somewhere, I feel.
Yeah.
It's not about as long as your ERP is fine.
Actually, you should totally do whatever
marketing lessons from MMA. Let's not get there. Let's please don't do that. We will lose two people over here then, Siddharth and Sriket.
Yeah, I think it's good that he's probably been still untouched by a marketing MBA. So let's leave it.
Leave it. I want to ask one question here. I mean, sort of this is going to segue. So if you have anything more to say on this, please feel free. My thing is, why? And I believe that mixed martial arts and so when I was growing up, the martial arts too was boxing. Like everyone watched only boxing. We didn't get to watch much, but everyone knew Muhammad Ali, everyone knew Foreman, everyone knew all those guys, even Mike Tyson. And that was what the craze was all about. And today it's far more varied. So partly, I guess, because of YouTube and things like that, but it's also something to do with probably culture or so. So what is the how did it get to be popular and how did it get to be popular in India? So what's the story there?
Very interesting because and I'll tell you how this came up. So mixed martial arts it's just straight up fighting with very minimal rules, and this came up when martial artists or martial art experts from around the world started saying that their martial art was the best martial art. Now, there was no common ground to show which was the best martial art. Japan had the most varied amounts of martial arts, and they started the mixed martial arts scene there. And there was there were organizations called Pride. And again, when something's in Japan, it's only in Japan. The rest of the world generally doesn't know what's going on. Yeah. So that's when the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys came. So the founder of Judo was this guy called Jigoro Kano, and he had a very great way of teaching. So the reason Judo became Judo is because of something called Randori, which they would do, and that was a new way of practicing a martial art. It was not just mindless drilling. He had a student who was very good at Newaza. Newaza means ground movements. In Judo, once you throw someone to the ground, what do you do to them? So there's an armbar, like Ronda Rousey. So you hold them in control for like a minute or 30 seconds in an Olympic match, you win the match outright. So that's how it is. And this one guy, his name was Mitsuyo Maeda. He was really good at Newaza techniques. And he went to Brazil I don't know why he went to Brazil, but he was in Brazil at one point in time, and he befriended a shopkeeper. And he took the shopkeeper's son as a student. And the shopkeeper's son was Carlos Gracie, who was considered the father of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, Carlos Gracie learned all of these Newaza techniques and started teaching it to his brothers. Brazilians are known to reproduce like rabbits, very much like Indians. And he had many brothers. So one of his brothers was Helio Gracie. Helio Gracie was short in stature, and he was always scrawny. And he was the farthest thing from a fighter that would come out of the family. So but he was a very cerebral guy. He started optimizing these moments where a smaller person could defeat a bigger person, like getting under the center of gravity of someone to sweep them from top to bottom. So he got all of these different techniques in place and called it Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And he had about, I think, 10 or 14 children, and he taught it to the whole family. Now, his eldest son, Rorion Gracie, was the leader of the family after Helio. So he said, if something's in Brazil or in Japan, the rest of the world's not going to know it. This has to go to the United States, or this is not going to work out. So he took his brothers and went to the US. Now, the best fighter in the family was one of his younger brothers, Rickson Gracie. And under Rickson Gracie, they had a littler brother called Royce Gracie. And Rorion Gracie organized an
There was no chance of a sudden global shortage of Gracies. They were like well stocked. Yeah. World was well stocked.
Very well stocked. Yeah. Very well stocked. They also hold the Guinness World Record for the family with the most number of professional athletes. So they have about 100 plus now. Yeah. So
imagine wanting to be a doctor in that family. I want to become an engineer.
I can almost imagine him like studying for NEET under the blanket with like a torch so that he can hide.
So Rorion Gracie organized this tournament to show which martial art was the best. So he said Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was going to be the best martial art, and he called it out. So he got his younger brother, Royce Gracie, who was maybe the second best fighter or third best fighter in the family. And he was only about 80 kilos. And people from kickboxing backgrounds, karate backgrounds, 6'4" people, 250 people have come in to the tournament. And this had no holds. It was bare knuckle. There were not even gloves for this. The first UFC that went. And the rules also, there were not many rules. There was no eye gouge. And there was also no groin shots. So eye gouges were not there and groin shots were not there. You could do anything else. Maybe you could also pull hair. I can't remember exactly. So Royce Gracie, everyone's come in with boxing gloves. Some people have come in with shoes. Some people are wearing only the karate pants. But Royce Gracie comes in a full kimono. He comes like a judo gi. It's called a gi. So he comes in a kimono. He's worn a black belt. And he's only 80 kilos, where the other guys are about 140, 150 kilos. And this guy goes through the entire roster like a hot knife through butter. He just taps every single one of them out. And people just went nuts. They're like, how can this 80 kilo guy beat all these the boxing, pro boxing guys? And it was because jiu-jitsu was designed to do that. Take someone to the ground, pass their legs, go, try and break a limb or choke them out. So one of these. And people just went nuts. And that's when jiu-jitsu became a thing. They opened up centers in the West Coast of America, and they would openly challenge any gym. Why don't you come in here and show us if you can beat? And they dominated the whole martial arts scene. And that's when jiu-jitsu became famous. And that was how the UFC was created, where a no-holds-barred fighting. They'd like to see anyone come and fight. There were also parallelly things going on in Japan, where jiu-jitsu fighters were beating sumo wrestlers.
Oh,
and, there's this one match of Rickson Gracie versus Akebono, a sumo wrestler. You should look at it. You can't even see Rickson Gracie in the whole fight.
So basically, we had Japanese culture, Brazilian reproduction capabilities, and America's love for capitalism and franchising this crap out of everything that led to jiu-jitsu being famous today.
Wow.
Absolutely.
And taking on and defeating the ancient art of Japanese sumo.
Let's take a quick break and revisit this fascinating topic in just a moment, right? So see you after the break.
What if you could relive some of the biggest and most public feuds in Indian corporate history?
Peer back through the window of time to see who among HUL or Nirma stood on top.
Or who was more dominant between Tata Motors and Maruti Suzuki?
Tune in with me, Ambi Parmeshwaran.
And me, Anupam Gupta, on Bank of Baroda presents The Last Brand Standing,
where we talk about two brands vying for the top position
and what their journeys were.
Every Tuesday on the IVM Podcast app or website,
or wherever you get your podcast from.
So welcome back. We are speaking to Siddharth Rao about martial arts, jiu-jitsu, mixed martial arts, kickboxing, and the whole 9 yards. So Siddharth, you were just telling us about Gracie and Akebono, which popularized MMA or jiu-jitsu actually in the United States.
Actually, so, if I can kind of steer it from there to something more closer back home, because this is where there are we've seen all of these different iterations of how different countries have their own unique styles of how mixed martial arts is evolving. Like Brazilians are tremendous strikers, but they're taking like Japanese angles of jiu-jitsu and integrating it into that. Is there? So obviously on the global scene, at least in like say the UFC, which is the most followed part of MMA, there isn't really much or any Indian representation, if I'm correct right now. But obviously, since the sport is growing in India, firstly, how well is it doing at the moment? And secondly, is there anything unique to the Indian way of going about MMA?
Very interesting. So, on the potential piece of it, 100%. Indians are on a really high growth curve. There's a lot of representation from within India where people really love the sport. If you go to Nagaland or any of the northeastern states where they have more of a warrior culture, you should see the crowds there. It's beautiful the way they support. But if you have it in Mumbai, maybe 10, 12 spectators.
No, but that's where I feel it's almost, if there was the first MMA person, I guess, would be a woman from the Northeast, I guess, who might be most likely to be the first MMA person in either a UFC or on a global level. Because I think the women who are representing in boxing and wrestling and stuff like that are really like almost topping the world in some way, especially from the Northeast. So I feel that might be a key area where something might come out.
Actually, we've already gone ahead there. Ritu Fogart is an MMA fighter.
Oh.
Right. Yeah.
And
I
she's,
saw that, yeah.
and she's in the
Hmm.
yes, and
All
she
India's
is
Gracie family, basically.
yeah,
Yeah.
India's Gracie family. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And Ritu Phogat is representing the country in the second largest, what do you say, MMA organization in the world, which is One Championship.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
When you look at the numbers, when you look at viewership numbers, One Championship has more viewership than the
That's
UFC.
Wow,
that's
really?
amazing. Wow.
Yes.
It's just UFC just has more high profile hype.
Money, more
Correct.
money. Yeah.
more money, and they have the best fighters in the world. Most of the best fighters in the world are in the UFC.
Right.
Because of the kind of money they give fighters, and a lot of UFC fights, the best ones are always pay-per-view, which explains lower numbers when it comes to viewership.
Mhm.
One Championship is concentrated on the Asia region
Okay.
first,
Mhm.
because Thailand has Muay Thai,
Yeah.
great,
Yeah.
sport, very, very exciting sport. And Philippines, there's a great team out of Philippines called Team Lakay. So they're into that emerging countries, I don't know, market, I would say.
Yeah.
And they want representation from all these people because we have a really high population. And when Ritu Phogat fights, I tune in. Yeah. So people like to see that. So now she's the star out of India.
Right.
And One Championship, I think, will make their entry into India with Ritu Phogat as a fighter fighting on the main card. So people are going to come and watch the fight. They'll have that. This is a sport in which my country is doing very well.
Very
So,
interesting.
No,
So-
I'm
so
pretty
yeah.
sure no one
Fascinating.
watched Javelin. Yeah.
Javelin, yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's fascinating because the two MMA coaches that I did train with, for some reason, there's always a connect to Thailand. For some reason, either they've gone for a tournament over there or something of that sort. And also the Brazilian connect. Also, I did notice. But yeah, this Thailand connect in particular, I wanted to ask you about that later. But I guess this kind of answers that. What you're saying.
So when the rest of the world calls the US the land of opportunity for fighters, land of opportunity is Thailand. Because a lot of international or Asia level tournaments are held there. And Thailand has a fighting culture. So they have the infrastructure built in ready. They have rings, they have large spaces where people can go work out. And large gyms from the US, like the American Kickboxing Academy and a few others, have opened large training facilities in Thailand because number one, it's cheap. Number two, there's traffic. And three, these become scouting grounds for really good fighters.
Right.
They find someone really good there coming in from India or Philippines or any other country from Asia. It becomes a scouting ground for them, and they do really well. They move to America on a scholarship, and they're given better opportunities there.
Yeah. So that brings me to the second part of the question. Just like Thailand has Muay Thai, is there any Indian local fighting forms that have percolated through to MMA, and or which are the ones which are the most popular? Where do Indian fighters borrow the most from?
Wrestling, hands down wrestling, because India's always had a great wrestling culture.
Right.
I think we started wrestling, and wrestling has definitely the biggest footprint. And the rest of and if you look at any other traditional Indian martial art, there was hardly any striking involved, unless there was a sword or something involved. So the only striking martial art in India I can think of is Kalaripayattu.
Kalaripayattu, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Correct. And that
but
was
even
more
that also has a sword involved. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, it was more of a combat with arms art. But the rest of it, where you're not allowed to use a weapon, would only be the martial arts. So there's Naga wrestling. There are, again, Indian Kushti is going to be, I think, the one with the largest footprint over there.
Interesting.
It just seems like these things are dying to be not modernized. I don't want to say modernized, but franchised.
Siddharth's great grandfather, that is my wife's grandfather, maternal grandfather, was a really good wrestler. Like, he was a really famous wrestler back in the day. And he was based in Mangalore, and he had a business. So he wasn't a professional wrestler, but apparently he was unbeaten in his entire lifetime.
Wow.
Incredible. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, when you look at, I mean, even if you look at like when you mentioned Ritu Fogart, the Fogart family as such, they that is actually a prime example of how they transitioned the akhada and the kushti culture into like modern like Olympic sports or modern martial arts in some way. And so it is something that comes there. So does that mean that the Indian fighters, especially who come out from that particular thing, are particularly good at the grappling aspects of things and really good at their ground game, so to speak?
Could be. Again, there are, I think, more than half of wrestling won't be applicable in today's mixed martial arts.
Right,
the stance, the distance, a lot of things have to be unlearned.
Right.
Not just, they have to unlearn most of the wrestling and learn striking and grappling. So I personally feel, looking at the people I've taught, that learning MMA from scratch, like learning MMA for MMA, learning all of these, wrestling for MMA, jiu-jitsu for MMA, is going to be a much better path for someone who wants to be an MMA athlete.
Right.
Rather than, transition from a wrestling or a kickboxing into an MMA.
It's too much to unlearn and relearn.
Correct. Unlearning is going to be the biggest portion, because when you're fighting inside a cage, when the adrenaline rush is there, only things from your muscle memory are going to come out. Even if you learned something 5 minutes before, like, the last minute exam preparation, that doesn't work here.
One of the things, sorry.
It's just the quote, I think Muhammad Ali's quote, right? Like, everyone has a plan till they get punched in the face.
That was Mike Tyson.
Mike Tyson, my bad. Sorry, Mike Tyson. Yeah. Sorry, Chuck, you were saying.
Easy mistake to make. So my coach, right, he keeps saying things like, he keeps using analogies or situations as if we are actually going to be involved in a fight, not a MMA fight in a ring with a referee and all that, but like an actual, if somebody comes from behind, then this is what you can do. So, like, to what extent, personally and as a coach, are these MMA techniques applicable in like real life for self-defense and things like that? Have you ever come across a situation where you or a student has actually managed to get themselves out of a situation because of these techniques?
So personally, and among my students, we've never got into a situation like that, because you avoid such situations on a very conscious level. So it's like a rat trying to pick a fight with an elephant. The elephant knows, like, just leave it. There's an easier fight down the road for you. So I think it comes into that you're in that headspace. But a lot of times, you can check out the Gracie Academy. Two of this Horian Gracies, the UFC founders' children, they have something called the Gracie Academy, where they have their students who are cops, who are so a lot of the US cops are reducing violence. All the George Floyd thing brought up a lot of things, and the cops who do jiu-jitsu do it in a more humane way. They don't do it, they just take someone to the ground without breaking any bones.
It is to you don't want to punish the person, you just want to immobilize them.
Neutralize the whole situation and without hurting them.
This is something that I've seen quite prevalent in like people who will learn any kinds of martial arts, really. Like I had a classmate who was also he got into mixed martial art really early, and he was like the last person to pick a fight. He was always the guy who was trying to resolve things without getting to violence, and he was built, and like he tried to demonstrate his mixed martial arts skills to us, and we could like see the power that he actually has. And it actually he could destroy anyone as such, but he had the most self-control. He had the best demeanor of all of us. Like, he was very slow to anger as such. And so that's where I feel like almost, and you referenced the cops and stuff. actually proper martial arts training is one of the key ways you can actually reduce the amount of lethal violence that people.
I have an anecdote here. I have an anecdote. So my son, older son, he trained with Siddharth, and he learned a fair amount of martial. This is really several years ago when he was studying engineering, and then he came to Bombay. He was working in Bombay for a while, and so he's not physically imposing. He's a regular guy. I mean, not muscled or anything like that. And there was he was driving, and someone cut across and maybe just brushed a fender or something like that, and that person pulls over, makes him pull over, and sort of he's come out. It's a full road rage thing happening. And Vyas, my son, says that he stepped out too, and he said, okay, I mean, whatever you want to do, come throw it at me. I'm here. And he says the person, he didn't expect calm, that level of calmness. Like Vyas said, okay, boss, you come. I mean, I give me what you've got. And he just took off. He just got back.
I've always wondered what an internet troll would be like in real life. I think you found our answer. So, Sid, on that note, do you feel like, I mean, I know we have moved away from the specific aspects of MMA to more meta discussions now about it, but do you think like it's made you and and your students as well, like calmer people to some extent, like almost knowing that we have this power right now, so we can actually, I don't know, like when Sriket spoke about his muscular yet sedate roommate, that just made me think like, is this like doing MMA, does it make you like a calmer person or something like that?
Yeah, so you will never land the first blow, however angry you are with the person.
That's fair point.
You will never land it. So even if you're not calm, you won't do it because you never meant harm to the person.
Yeah. I've heard similar things about karate as well.
And it's not like a rule or anything. You just get conditioned that way for some reason. It's like a highly intellectual person trying to explain something or argue with a very stupid person. The intellectual person will just let it slide.
And that's where also it would be like the person who knows MMA well probably won't land the first blow, but he probably definitely might land the last blow.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So it's that. And plus during the teenage years, if all your energy is spent there and you have a lot of endorphin release after your workout every day or after your sport every day, it automatically makes you calm, like biologically you're calmer because of the endorphin release.
Yeah. And that's what also makes me realize it's like, it's counterintuitive. A lot of, I was watching this new Farhan Akhtar movie called Tufan, I think it was Tufan or something. I was watching that, and I was watching, I mean, the movie aside, but the point about like how, like when you're getting your boxing license, you have to make this pledge about how you kind of won't use this thing for something else, for like bullying people or whatever else. But the one thing that I kind of got when I was thinking about it, and now the conversation I've seen here, is that it's almost like there are people who are hefty, there are people who are built, there are people who are strong, right? When learning a martial art is not exactly learning how to weaponize yourself for the general public, but it's almost like it's giving you a level of control. You have the wild horse and you put reins on it, and you have learned how to control yourself and harness that energy in a specific pursuit, rather than just like so therefore when you do learn the martial arts, you're actually a safer person with strength than a person who does not know it.
Wow, that's felt like complete manifesto you wrote over there. Just deeply profound.
Yeah.
And
I have all my pent up advertising energies now.
Sorry,
please. Yeah, you were saying, Siddharth.
And it's like Maslow's hierarchy. So what martial art gives you is physical safety. And once you have the physical safety, then you can think of other things. So when you're out on the road, if there's someone approaching you, you're not as scared anymore.
Right.
So,
Yeah. So you're right. So when that aspect is taken care of, you actually are calmer and you're less fidgety and less prone to like lashing out literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fascinating, man. So what happens, like, so where are you at right now? What else are you planning to do? Like, I just realized we actually never finished your story. We got as far as the jiu-jitsu place, and then after that we just went off and randomly veered off into various other topics. But so what do you do right now, and where does Siddharth Rao go from here?
So Siddharth Rao today sells software.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
that's the most Bangalore thing I've ever heard. A name like Siddharth Rao with that accent sells software in Bangalore with that ponytail as well. You look like a part-time bassist, by the
way. Yeah. So that's me, and I'm only a hobbyist. I have stopped kickboxing. I've stopped boxing. I've stopped all striking arts because I don't want a concussion. But I actively pursue jiu-jitsu, and I do jiu-jitsu back in Mysore now. Since I'm working from home, I teach some of the kids who come to class. I teach jiu-jitsu, and the reason I chose jiu-jitsu is you can go all out. You can go 100% and still come back and train the next day because you're not getting concussed. You go 100% in boxing, you're going to either have a beef with your training partner, or you're going to hurt him, or he's going to hurt you. So, and I don't want a concussion, and I'm not going to take it up professionally. But it's something I dearly love, very passionate about, and would never stop practicing jiu-jitsu, I think.
Yeah, wonderful.
That's fantastic, dude. Super. So on that note, I think I think this has been a superb conversation. I mean, while talking to you, I realized how much I actually enjoy watching and following.
I never realized you knew so much about this actually.
That was a revelation.
I had kind of this latent interest in MMA, and I was reading about it and stuff, and like just the way the power was harnessed, and how it was kind of like all that training culminating in that little time frame of your performance, and that's such an incredible sport as such. So I mean, it is a truly tremendous sport, and that teaches you so much more than beyond just the physical aspect of how to kind of take down your opponent. So thanks so much for this conversation. It was super fun.
Thank you.
It was great.
This was fun too.
It was great fun. So let's sign off. So stay safe, stay martial, and stay simplified.
I don't think that. Okay, never mind. I think at this point we stopped analyzing that. Thanks everyone, and see you next week with another episode of Simplified.
Bye.
Bye.
Hi everybody, just wanted to ask everyone for a quick favor. We're running a brand survey right now and would really appreciate it if you could let us know what you think about the advertising on IVM. Go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and do let us know. As part of this, we'll be selecting 10 random participants and sending them some IVM swag, so do fill out those surveys. Hey everybody, it's been a great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On a show about crypto, Rohan Joshi is joined by Jayanti Kanani, co-founder and CEO of Matic Network, to discuss crypto and blockchain inventions in India. On Audio Gayan, Kedar and Avindeep talk to one of India's most experienced designers, Rush Bhatt, the co-founder of ClearTrip. On The Longest Constitution, Priya takes us through religious personal laws and the criminalization of triple talaq. On Yuddha, Anirudh tells us how the Mughals transformed from a warband into an empire. Why is cringe watching so addictive and viral? On Smarter with Sid, Siddharth covers cringe watching from 4 perspectives: creators, individuals, communities, and brands. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week: Cred, Bank of Baroda, Quarter, CoinSwitch, Kuber, Slay Coffee, Intel, Kotak Mahindra Bank, and Oxfam India. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Have you ever wondered where the business world is headed? How the ways in which we create, market, and sell to consumers will evolve? Or if we'll ever go back to wearing pants while working? For answers to all of this and more, tune into Advertising is Dead with me, Varun Dugirala. Every Tuesday, as I talk to entrepreneurs, leaders, and change makers from across business, media, marketing, and beyond. You can catch all episodes of Advertising is Dead on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcasts from.